You think Christmas is about twinkling lights, warm hearths, and the gentle jingle of sleigh bells, don't you? A time of peace, goodwill, and perhaps a harmless ghost story told by the fire. But what if I told you that for the people of medieval Europe, the holiday season, particularly the 12 days surrounding the winter solstice, was not just a time of celebration, but a period of profound, bone-chilling terror? Welcome to Medieval Times Uncharted, where today we plunge into the frigid, shadowed heart of the medieval winter to unearth the monstrous entities and spectral horrors that truly haunted the holiday season, turning festive nights into a desperate vigil against the unseen. But medieval people didn't fear Christmas for one reason. They feared it because they believed everything could come for them at once. Imagine yourself in a small, isolated village, nestled deep within the snow-laden forests of 12th century Germany. The days are short, the sun a pale, distant memory, and the nights stretch endlessly, black and cold enough to steal your breath. Your home, a small, smoky cottage, offers little protection from the biting wind that howls through the cracks in the walls. Outside, the world is a vast, frozen wilderness, a realm where the familiar boundaries of reality seem to thin and fray. This wasn't a time for cozy carols. This was a time for fear, for huddling close to the fire, clutching amulets, and whispering ancient prayers against the things that stirred in the deep snow and the darkest corners of the long night. For the medieval mind, the winter solstice, the longest night of the year, was not merely an astronomical event. It was a perilous threshold. You feel it in your bones, a primal dread that predates Christianity itself. This was when the natural world died, and the supernatural world awakened. The veil between the living and the dead, between the mundane and the monstrous, was believed to be at its thinnest. And once that veil opened, medieval people believed it didn't close until someone paid the price. The Christian Church, in its tireless effort to convert and consolidate, attempted to overlay its own narrative onto these ancient pagan fears. The birth of Christ was strategically placed to coincide with the solstice, a beacon of hope to push back the encroaching darkness. But you know, deep down, that you cannot simply banish centuries of ingrained terror with a single sermon. The old gods, the old fears, they merely donned new guises, lurking just beneath the surface of the new faith, ready to emerge when the nights grew long and the cold bit deepest. The most terrifying thing about medieval Christmas wasn't what children wanted. It was what came looking for them. One of the most pervasive and terrifying figures to stalk the medieval Christmas was not a jolly old man, but a monstrous, goat-horned demon known by many names, yet universally feared. You hear the whispers of the Krampus, or perhaps the Perchta, or Frau Holle, depending on your region. These were not benevolent gift-givers. They were dark enforcers, punishing the naughty with whips, chains, and even abduction. Imagine the terror of a child who, having misbehaved, hears the heavy cloven hoofbeats approaching their cottage door on Christmas Eve. You pull the rough wool blanket tighter around your head, praying the sounds are just the wind, but knowing, deep down, they are not. The Krampus, in particular, was a figure of pure, unadulterated dread. Often depicted with shaggy fur, long pointed horns, a long pointed tongue, and a basket on his back for carrying away wicked children, he was the antithesis of holiday cheer. You see him in crude woodcuts, his eyes burning with malevolent glee, his whip raised to strike. His purpose was not to teach a lesson, but to instill absolute, paralyzing fear. His presence during the Christmas season served as a stark reminder that the joyous birth of Christ was also a time of judgment, and the consequences for sin were immediate and terrifyingly tangible. But the Krampus wasn't the worst punishment they feared. Some Christmas visitors didn't take children away. They stayed. Medieval people believed Christmas wasn't just about being good. It was about not being noticed. In the Germanic and Alpine regions, the figure of Perchta, or Perchta, was equally chilling. She was an ancient goddess, or perhaps a witch, associated with the winter solstice. You hear the stories. She would visit homes during the 12 days of Christmas, particularly on the 12th night. If she found the spinning flax undone or the house untidy, her wrath was swift and brutal. She would slit the bellies of the lazy, stuffing them with straw and pebbles. You worked tirelessly, your fingers raw from the spinning wheel, knowing that her cold, judging eyes might be watching through the frosted window. Not everything that came at Christmas was alive. Some things were unfinished. Beyond these punishing figures, the very air of the Christmas season was thought to be thick with spirits. You light extra candles, not just for warmth, but to ward off the restless dead. The belief in ghosts, or revenants, was deeply ingrained in medieval society, and the solstice was their prime time. These weren't always benevolent specters. They were often the unquiet dead, seeking to settle old scores, to reclaim lost possessions, or simply to drag the living into their cold, lonely existence. You hear a floorboard creak in the empty room above, and your blood runs cold. Is it just the old house settling, or has Uncle Theron returned from his watery grave? If you heard this during Christmas, you were already too late. In some regions, particularly in Scandinavia and the British Isles, the Christmas season was dominated by the terrifying concept of the wild hunt. You hear the distant baying of spectral hounds, the thundering hooves of unseen horses, and the chilling cries of a ghostly procession sweeping across the frozen landscape. This was a supernatural chase, led by a fearsome figure, Odin, King Arthur, or even the devil himself, accompanied by a horde of dead warriors, demons, and lost souls. To witness the wild hunt was an omen of disaster, death, or even to be swept away into their ranks, forever doomed to ride the winter winds. Imagine yourself caught outside after dark, perhaps returning from a neighbor's cottage. The snow crunches under your boots, the air is still and silent, and then a faint sound on the wind. It grows louder, a terrifying cacophony of howls and shouts that seems to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. You press yourself against the trunk of a gnarled oak, your heart pounding like a drum, praying that the ghostly riders will pass you by, that their cold, dead eyes will not fall upon you. The wild hunt was a visceral manifestation of the medieval fear of the untamed wilderness, the unknown, and the unstoppable power of death itself. And the most terrifying part? You didn't have to leave your house for Christmas to come for you. The fear of the wild hunt was not merely a local superstition, it was a pan-European phenomenon, adapting to local folklore while retaining its core terror. You hear tales of its leader changing from region to region. In some places, it was the spectral King Hurla. In others, the legendary Cernunnos, the horned god of the forest, now transformed into a terrifying winter spirit. But the outcome was always the same, a chilling reminder of mortality and the untamed forces that lay beyond human control. You quickly learn to respect the curfew, to stay indoors when the wind howls a certain way, for fear of being swept up in that spectral procession. The safest place you knew was also the most dangerous during Christmas. Beyond the grand, sweeping terror of the wild hunt, the medieval Christmas season was also a time when more localized, intimate horrors were believed to emerge. You check the locks on your doors, not just against human thieves, but against entities that could slip through the smallest crack or even manifest within your very walls. These were the household spirits, often benevolent during the rest of the year, but prone to malevolence during the liminal period of Christmas. Consider the boggart in England, or the Nisse, tomt in Scandinavia. These were typically small, often mischievous, creatures associated with the farm or household. They might help with chores, protect livestock, or bring good fortune, provided they were treated with respect and given offerings, especially during the festive season. You leave out a bowl of porridge with a pat of butter on Christmas Eve, a silent plea for their continued favor. But if you forgot, or if you offended them, their nature could turn dark. A benevolent Nissa could become a terrifying poltergeist, throwing objects, spoiling food, or even causing physical harm. You hear the stories of milk turning sour overnight, of tools disappearing, or of a sudden icy gust of wind blowing through a closed room. These weren't random occurrences, they were the work of a slighted household spirit, demanding respect. You learn to be extra careful with your words and actions during the 12 days of Christmas, knowing that the smallest slight could invite a supernatural tantrum. During medieval Christmas, the monster might not knock. It might already be human. The fear of shapeshifters also intensified during the winter months. Werewolves, or lycanthropes, were not just figures of folklore. They were a terrifying reality for many in the medieval world. The long, dark nights, the isolation of snow-covered villages, and the desperation caused by hunger created the perfect breeding ground for such legends. You hear the distant howl in the forest, and your mind immediately conjures the image of a man, cursed or willing, transforming into a ravenous beast, his human eyes now burning with a predatory hunger. Chronicles from the period, such as those by Gervase of Tilbury in the 13th century, meticulously detail accounts of werewolves. These weren't always mythical beasts. Sometimes they were believed to be actual people who had made a pact with the devil, or who were cursed. During the Christmas season, with its emphasis on spiritual purity and the battle against evil, the fear of such demonic transformations was particularly acute. You keep a silver cross close, and the local priest blesses the livestock with extra fervor. Some Christmas monsters didn't punish sin, they punished poverty. The concept of the Yule Cat from Icelandic folklore provides another chilling example of a Christmas monster. This wasn't a cute, cuddly feline. The Jólakötturinn was a monstrous black cat, said to roam the snowy countryside during Christmas, looking into windows. Its purpose? To eat anyone who hadn't received new clothes before Christmas Eve. You hastily sew new garments, your fingers pricked and sore, knowing that to be caught without new attire meant a gruesome end in the jaws of the colossal cat. This legend served as a powerful incentive for people to finish their autumn wool processing and ensure everyone had warm clothing for the harsh winter. But the monsters weren't always external. Sometimes, the horror was believed to come from within, or from the very food you ate. The medieval Christmas feast, while a rare luxury, also came with its own set of fears and superstitions. You watch carefully as the cook prepares the meal, for fear of hidden malevolence. The belief in changelings was also heightened during the Christmas season. These were believed to be fairy children, swapped for human babies, especially if the human child was unbaptized or left unattended. The long dark nights and the liminal nature of the solstice made it easier for the fair folk to cross over. You keep your newborn close, never letting them out of sight, and place iron charms around their cradle, knowing that a sickly, crying infant might not be your own, but a mischievous, often malevolent, fairy substitute. The very act of feasting could also invite unwanted attention. In some traditions, particularly in Northern Europe, it was believed that if you left food out for the spirits of the dead or for the household sprites, it was a good thing. But if you were too lavish, or if you celebrated too boisterously, you risked attracting the attention of more malevolent entities. You hear the stories of entire feasts disappearing overnight, or of strange, guttural noises coming from the pantry. These were the unwanted guests, the hungry spirits and monsters drawn by the scent of celebration, ready to claim their share. At some point, medieval people stopped asking how to stop the monsters, and started asking how to survive them. The medieval Christmas was also a time for prophecy and divination, often with a dark undertone. You huddle around a flickering candle, casting shadows on the wall, trying to discern your future. People would perform rituals to predict who would die in the coming year, who would marry, or what misfortunes awaited them. These weren't always innocent games. They were often desperate attempts to gain some control over a terrifyingly unpredictable world. and the answers were not always comforting. Consider the practice of lead pouring, blygeisen. You melt lead over a candle and quickly drop it into cold water, watching the shapes it forms. A ship might mean travel, but a coffin meant death. On Christmas Eve, these divinations were particularly potent, believed to offer a glimpse into the coming year's fate. You watch the molten lead solidify, your heart pounding, hoping for a shape that promises good fortune, but dreading the one that signals impending doom. The very act of telling ghost stories, a tradition we associate with Christmas, had a much darker purpose in the medieval period. These weren't just for entertainment. They were cautionary tales, meant to reinforce moral lessons and to remind people of the ever-present spiritual dangers. You listen to the elder's voice, low and gravelly, spinning a tale of a vengeful spirit, and you feel the hairs on your arms stand up, knowing that such things were believed to be very real. The fear of witches and sorcerers also reached a fever pitch during the Christmas season. With the thin veil between worlds, it was believed that their powers were amplified. You see the suspicious glances cast at the old woman on the edge of the village, the one who knows too much about herbs and whispers to herself. If a sudden illness struck, or a crop failed, or livestock died, it was easy to blame the dark arts, especially during a time when spiritual forces were believed to be so active. The Church, while trying to establish its own narrative, often inadvertently reinforced these fears. Sermons would warn against pagan practices and demonic influences, inadvertently giving more credence to the very entities they sought to suppress. You hear the priest's fiery words, describing the torments of hell and the temptations of the devil, and you can't help but connect them to the dark figures that haunt the folklore of your village. The fear of the unseen was not limited to the grand demonic figures. You also had to contend with the more subtle yet equally menacing local spirits that emerged during the Christmas season. In Wales, for instance, the tradition of the Mari Lwyd was a festive yet undeniably eerie spectacle. You see it approaching your door, a horse's skull, adorned with ribbons and bells, carried on a pole by a person hidden beneath a white sheet. While today it's a folk custom, its origins are steeped in ancient pagan rituals, and its appearance in the medieval period would have carried a much heavier weight of superstition. Imagine the Mari Lwyd, its empty eye sockets staring blankly, its jaws clacking rhythmically, as it challenges your household to a battle of wits and song. You participate in the rhyming exchange, knowing that to lose meant inviting bad luck into your home for the coming year. This wasn't just a game. It was a ritualistic encounter with a representation of the liminal, the boundary between life and death, between the old year and the new. You offer it food and drink, a gesture of appeasement to ensure its spectral blessing, not its curse. Across Northern Europe, various forms of Yule lads or Christmas elves also roamed. Unlike the benevolent elves of modern lore, these were often mischievous, sometimes outright dangerous creatures. In Iceland, the Jólakarlinn were a band of 13 pranksters, each with a distinct, often unpleasant habit, from slamming doors to stealing sausages. You double-check your doors and windows, making sure all food is secured, knowing that a missing candle or a broken dish might be the work of these unseen, unwelcome guests. Their presence was a constant, low-level anxiety throughout the long nights. The Church, ever present in medieval life, found itself in a constant battle against these deeply ingrained pagan beliefs. You hear the sermons, fiery and passionate, condemning the worship of false idols and the practice of heathen rituals. Priests would preach against the wild hunt, declaring it to be the devil's procession, and warn against leaving offerings for household spirits, labeling it as consorting with demons. Yet the fear was too deep-seated, the traditions too ancient to be simply eradicated by decree. Instead, a complex process of syncretism occurred. The Church often absorbed or reinterpreted pagan customs, giving them a Christian veneer. The Yule log, originally a pagan tradition of burning a large log to honor the sun and ward off evil spirits during the solstice, became a symbol of Christ's light. The evergreen tree, a symbol of life in winter, was adopted into Christmas decorations. But you know that beneath the Christian symbolism, the old fears and the old magic still simmered, barely contained. This tension between the old and the new created a unique psychological landscape. You are told by the priest that Christ's birth banishes the darkness, but your grandmother still insists on placing iron tools outside the door to ward off witches. You attend Mass, seeking divine protection, but you also secretly hang sprigs of holly and mistletoe, ancient symbols of protection, above your hearth. The medieval Christmas was a time of spiritual duality, where faith and superstition walked hand in hand, each offering its own form of solace and fear. To combat these pervasive terrors, medieval people employed a wide array of protective measures. You see them everywhere. Iron. Believed to repel evil spirits and fairies, iron was often placed around cradles, hearths, and doorways. You ensure your iron cooking pots are visible, and perhaps even leave an iron horseshoe above the stable door. Salt, a powerful purifier. Salt was sprinkled on thresholds and in corners of rooms to create barriers against malevolent entities. You make sure the salt shaker is always full, a small but vital defense. You tend the fire diligently, knowing that its light is your best defense. The act of communal vigilance was also crucial. You gather with your neighbors, sharing stories and fears, finding strength in numbers. The isolation of the long winter nights was a breeding ground for terror, but shared company offered a measure of safety. Feasting, singing, and games were not just for joy. They were a collective act of defiance against the encroaching darkness, a way to generate enough noise and light to keep the monsters at bay. Specific prayers and blessings were recited with extra fervor during the Christmas season. You kneel before the crucifix, your lips moving silently, asking for divine intervention against the wild hunt, against the Krampus, against the spirits of the unquiet dead. The priest would bless homes, livestock, and fields, attempting to create a spiritual shield against the malevolent forces believed to be most active during this time. The psychological impact of living through such a Christmas season was profound. You live in a constant state of low-level anxiety, punctuated by moments of acute terror. Every creak of the house, every rustle in the woods, every distant howl could be a sign. Sleep offered little respite, as nightmares were often believed to be visitations from spirits or premonitions of doom. You wake up in a cold sweat, your heart pounding, trying to distinguish between a dream and a genuine warning. This pervasive fear shaped not only individual behavior but also communal practices. The emphasis on generosity and charity during Christmas, for instance, might have been partly driven by a desire to appease the spirits and ensure good fortune, or to demonstrate piety in the face of overwhelming spiritual threats. You share your meager provisions, hoping that your kindness will be noted by unseen eyes, ensuring your family's safety. The long nights of winter, amplified by the folklore of monsters and ghosts, also fostered a unique form of storytelling. You gather around the hearth, the firelight dancing on the faces of your family, as an elder recounts tales of ancient evils and heroic struggles. These weren't just entertainment. They were lessons, warnings, and a way to pass down the collective wisdom and fears of the community. The stories were a form of psychological armor, preparing you for the terrors that might lurk just outside the door. Even the concept of Christmas cheer itself can be seen as a defiant act against this backdrop of fear. The forced merriment, the loud singing, the boisterous games, these were not merely expressions of joy, but a deliberate attempt to create an atmosphere of life and vitality that would repel the forces of death and darkness. You sing louder, you laugh harder, trying to convince yourself and the unseen entities that you are strong and unafraid. The medieval Christmas, therefore, was a complex tapestry woven with threads of faith, fear, and survival. It was a time when the sacred and the profane, the joyful and the terrifying, coexisted in a delicate balance. You navigate this treacherous landscape, holding on to hope, but always with one eye on the shadows, one ear to the wind, listening for the telltale signs of the monsters and ghosts that truly terrorized the holiday season. As the centuries progressed and the light of the Renaissance and the Enlightenment slowly pushed back the shadows of superstition, many of these Christmas monsters faded into folklore, becoming quaint tales rather than genuine threats. But their echoes remain. You see them in the darker corners of our modern holiday traditions, in the cautionary tales, and in the lingering chill that sometimes accompanies the longest nights of winter. The enduring power of these stories also speaks to a fundamental human need to personify the unknown and the uncontrollable. The long, cold, dark nights of winter were, and still are, a time of vulnerability. In the medieval world, lacking scientific explanations for disease, famine, and natural disasters, attributing these misfortunes to malevolent entities provided a framework for understanding, and perhaps even for coping. You understand that it is easier to fight a monster with horns and a whip than to fight the abstract terror of starvation or a sudden, fatal illness. The act of storytelling itself, especially during these long winter nights, was a crucial survival mechanism. By giving form to their fears, by recounting the tales of the Wild Hunt or the Yule Cat, medieval people were, in a way, exercising control over them. You listen to the stories, and though they are terrifying, they also provide a sense of shared experience, a communal understanding of the dangers that bind you together. Even today, the appeal of these darker Christmas traditions is experiencing a resurgence. You see it in the popularity of Krampusnacht celebrations, in films and literature that explore the darker side of folklore, and in the renewed interest in ancient pagan traditions. Perhaps, in our increasingly rational and predictable world, there is a part of us that still yearns for the thrill of the unknown, for the chilling possibility that something ancient and monstrous might still stir in the longest nights of the year. So, the next time you gather with loved ones during the holiday season, surrounded by warmth and light, take a moment to remember the medieval souls who came before you. They lit their fires not just for comfort, but for defiance. They sang their carols not just for joy, but for protection. They told their stories not just for entertainment, but as a shield against the very real, very terrifying monsters and ghosts that truly terrorized their Christmas. You realize that the festive cheer we enjoy today is, in many ways, a hard-won victory. It is the culmination of centuries of human resilience, of a slow, arduous process of pushing back the darkness, both literal and metaphorical. But the darkness, like the ancient fears, never truly disappears. It merely retreats to the edges, waiting for the nights to grow long again, for the veil to thin, for the human heart to remember its primal terrors. And as the final days of the year dwindle, and the longest night approaches, you might find yourself glancing over your shoulder, listening to the wind, and wondering if a faint, distant howl is just the wind, or something far older, far more sinister, stirring in the snow-laden forests. For in the heart of winter, even now, the echoes of medieval fears can still send a shiver down your spine. The Christmas you know is a tapestry woven with threads of joy, hope, and peace. But beneath that beautiful surface lies a darker, more ancient pattern. A reminder of the monsters and ghosts that once terrorized the holiday season, and a chilling thought that perhaps, just perhaps, they never truly left. Because Christmas wasn't about joy back then, it was about making it to morning. If the chilling legends of the Christmas season call to you, like this video, subscribe to Medieval Times Uncharted, and let's continue to unearth the hidden horrors of the past. Comment below. Which medieval Christmas monster frightens you the most? Share this video with a friend who loves a truly terrifying holiday story.